Today on Rebuilders, we are chatting with Terry Walling. What do we cover, Mark?
It's a great episode.
It really is.
We look at renewal, the hunger in the world for renewal, revival. We learn about how God's moved in the past, particularly in California at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s when he moved. What can we learn from that? And how do we press in this moment for his presence?
Great. And if you want to know more, have a bit of a behind-the-scenes conversation, you can subscribe to our mailing list by heading to rebuilders.co and subscribing there. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome to Rebuilders. My name is Liddy and I'm here with Mark and Daniel and a very special guest, Terry Walling.
Hello.
Welcome, Terry.
Welcome.
All the way from California.
Yeah, it seems a long way away till you get on a plane and then you know it's a long way away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But having done it many times, the thing I'm most excited with having done one of these before on the famous Zoom platform, I'm actually live.
You are live. It's so great to have you here.
And
In person.
with that comes the presence of Danish.
Yes.
You don't just get to watch us, you get to
And
Yeah.
it was
partake.
really, I just got to tell you, I had to go to counseling and everything. It was really hard to watch you eat the Danish and stay focused on
Yeah.
I actually
maybe
remember
the things of God. You know,
I remember that episode and me madly like trying to get your address and like seeing if I could Uber some pastries, but I just couldn't tell.
I
you
remember that
for you.
too. But it was that thought that was just that really endeared me to you. I appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you present with us, Terry,
Very
and
nice.
that you can enjoy some pastries. Still many there before you. How was your journey over?
Good. We, that it's that leaving San Francisco at midnight, arriving in Melbourne in the morning, trying to trick your body that the 16 hours that occurred in between was really just an extended night.
Yeah.
And, felt good getting up. And then for me, it's day two. And day two, it just boom, hit you.
Yeah.
Oops, probably too loud for Daniel.
Oh,
But
no,
anyways,
that's fine.
it hit you. And so this is day three, though. So there's hope.
Well, the coffee is flowing.
Coffee is
You're
good.
in the coffee capital. And
Yep.
we're looking forward to.
Well, that was a funny thing. Quickly on the plane, Ozzy sitting behind us. We lived here obviously 5 years. We were getting up, ready to get off the plane. I said, "So guess what? The first thing I want when we get here." She goes, "I don't know." She didn't. It's like she didn't know if I really lived in Australia, or whatever. I was 5 years, and I go, "I want a coffee." And she goes, "Oh,
That's-
you are.
that's the code.
You became an Aussie."
Like one of us.
Especially here in Melbourne.
One
Oh
of
my
us.
gosh, one of us. We felt much more endeared to each other. I thought, yeah.
Well, one of the dirty secrets of this podcast is Daniel doesn't drink coffee.
No, it's not a daddy. I
What?
live in the glory of a non-coffee based
What?
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but the way you were raised, you have other things you're based in.
You were
right?
in the
yeah, true. I did have a glass of wine last
a
night
little.
at 10 o'clock.
You failed to confess that, but you're freely confessing. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
That's great. That's good. I
I like
like it.
DNA. So
I love your DNA.
got to lean into it.
Your high school had a vineyard. We just talked about that before.
Yeah.
His
yeah.
high school had
Vineyard and a winery and
Wow.
that was the whole thing.
Here, my
So
Lord,
crazy.
send me.
And yet you came to Melbourne. So
Yeah.
go figure.
Amazing.
Yep.
Well, we're privileged enough to have you, Terry, for a few episodes. We'll be digging into things, and we know the audience is going to really, I think, benefit from your wisdom and what you bring and who you are.
Yeah, I was wondering, you better not advertise a few episodes. Oh, but keep going.
At least more than one.
Okay.
And but we thought actually a really good place to start is on the topic of renewal. Yeah. And there is definitely a sense in the world triggered by the Asbury awakening, but I think before then, where there just seems to be. I had someone say to me yesterday, there are spot fires. They were talking about Western Australia, and they're saying like there seems to be little spot fires. But I'm hearing that. I've just had the privilege in the last couple of weeks of traveling around our country a little bit and being to different cities, and just there seems to be a sense of hunger and expectation I'm not seeing.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's not just Australia;
No.
it's across the world, and we had our first renewal sessions last night, which
good.
you were there, which was great to have you
good.
there.
Yeah.
And we sort of felt like this sense of pushing into something. We really saw it as a leap of faith. We simply just got together, prayed, worshipped, talked about renewal.
Yep.
And we just thought there are lots of people feeling this hunger out there. And perhaps a great place to start is many of our audience who mostly the sort of what is the key demographic of our audience, Daniel? What do the stats tell us? And the emails?
Somewhere between late 20s into kind of mid to late 30s kind of bracket. Yeah.
So very much a sort of millennial, it's a top end of Gen Z or Gen Z. And but of course, welcome if you're not in that age bracket, as some of you are. But many of them are feeling this hunger for renewal, yet have not experienced it. And it's just interesting. I thought it'd be a great place to start. Is very much your sort of beginnings in ministry. You were in California,
I was.
When there was the Jesus people and all of that, and Wimber and all different things moving. I just thought it'd be a fascinating starting point. What was that like? Tell us a little bit of that story.
Well, it kind of, when you're a teenager, you're not aware of big picture. You're not aware of all the stuff going on. You're, aware of other things in the wonderful teenage years. Funny story. I was going to a Baptist church at that time. And when you're a teenager and the pastor comes up to you, and I was kind of a ringleader a little bit, and he says, whatever you do, don't go to that tent down there with the big dove on it and that Costa Mesa thing that's all happening down there, because we're Baptists and Baptists don't do that, we don't believe in the Holy Spirit. Or he didn't say that, but anyways, bottom line is, if you tell that to a teenager, that's the first place now you want to go. I don't know if that was his inbred strategy, but we're going. And then for sure, he said, if you ever find yourself there, don't go to the afterglow, because that's when the spooky stuff happens, For sure, we're sticking around for the afterglow to see what that's all about. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it was just like we were swept up into something. And all of a sudden, it was everywhere. And it had been going for a while. So it had been fueling. I think sometimes when people think of renewal, it goes hot flash right away. No, that's not really how, at least my experience is. It's a growing fire. It's just like when you hit a beach and you start a fire, it's not the fire you have in an hour or two, but it's that first fire that starts to, kind of warm people's heart and stuff like that. So I was going down every Thursday night to hear this bald old guy speak named Chuck Smith. So all that stuff that's coming out in Jesus Revolution was part of it. I didn't know all the backstory of it, but it was just kind of like, wow. And then these bands started to go out into the park. So I took my friends, we went to a big park, these Love Song and all those groups were sharing and stuff like that. And it was really that, wow, God is actually doing something. He's not something I'm reading about now, because I grew up in the church. I was one of the first holy rollers. My dad we used to have to clean the church, and he wrapped me with cloths around me, this is true, I've been to counseling over it, and I would actually lay in the back and roll down underneath the pews, cleaning the pews. Boom, the first holy roller. Wow. That is gospel truth, and I've been to counseling. But anyways, so I heard about God, and I heard about all the things he has done.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was so utterly ridiculous. You could drive along the freeway and people had bumper stickers and everything, and you'd, give them one way and yes to Jesus. I mean, in California.
Yeah.
It was really incredible. And yet, it wasn't everybody, but all of a sudden it just started to light a fire in a lot of soggy logs that were out there and people who doubted. And it was pretty extraordinary. For me personally, finally, I began to discover it's for me. I think what renewal almost does for believers sometimes is convince them they belong. It started to happen inside of me. It started to kindle my heart And it's what thrust me into, I was going to play American baseball and make a lot of money. And my sister was going to be the missionary, and she ended up marrying a guy making a lot of money, and I was the missionary. But it thrust my whole direction of life, a whole new pathway for him and stuff. I mean, to the point where I started this ought not have happened. Our church actually located in a shopping center, and that wasn't something you did during those times. And Saturday night, we would actually invite these bands in, and out in the parking lot, we'd have 400 or 500 kids showing up every Saturday night.
Wow.
Praising Jesus. And it was one of those things where you do something and ask forgiveness versus permission. I forgot to ask permission to do all that kind of stuff. So I had some stuff I had to work through, but it was just a spontaneous. It was organic. It wasn't institutional. It was not something we, put in the diary or the schedule for 4 weeks out. It just happened. It was beautiful.
Can I ask, with those meetings that you went to as a teenager, what was it like? What did it look like? What were people doing?
Yeah. Well, this is going to sound like it had essentially one form. The worship. All of a sudden, the worship team would come out and we would just start singing. Nobody would announce. There were no announcements or anything like that. And they just start singing. We'd sing for 45 minutes long. Sometimes there was that's all we did that night.
Yeah.
Or it broke into small prayer groups or whatever. But then at some point in time, the guy who was kind of the principal or the leader in that, Chuck Smith, would get out and he'd just start reading. He read the Bible verse by verse. I know this sounds weird, starting in Genesis. And he explained it all to us.
Wow.
And then it got so believable, we went out and then really started just telling people about it. I mean, it's just, I know that sounds so utterly simple. That's all it was. And then we'd say, Thursday night, I'll see you next week. And we'd come back and we'd get fire and we'd go and stuff. And I mean, it was just so real. But the people up on the stage weren't performing. And they were then stopping a song and telling us about their changed life. And it just felt like all of a sudden it became accessible to all of us, not just, to a few of us. And I think one of the biggest things for me, what it did was I feel things, heart things. I hadn't felt my faith.
Yeah.
I really hadn't. I hadn't felt my faith. And I even heard people in those days, emotions, I can't trust them, and da-da-da-da. And so, in fact, faith and then feeling. And so the feeling's in the caboose, it just comes along and stuff like that. No, wait a minute. If this stuff has that truth you say in it, it ought to revolutionize my heart as well as my head.
Yeah.
And I think, some people even dispute revival, renewal stuff because you start feeling, and here's the problem, you start feeling things you don't know how to control. And the Western world is so control-oriented. And maybe I can't even explain, and I'm not talking right now about tongues or anything like that. I'm just talking about that sense of his presence.
Yeah.
And yet that's the thing. I think the faith needs to be lived here. We shouldn't leave one out, but it's God's consuming presence that takes us into a whole different way to think and a whole different way to see. And when I think of renewal and revival, I think of the reverse. We in the West have targeted the head, hoping the heart will change. I think when renewal comes and revival comes, it's the Spirit of God penetrating the heart, and it elevates us to think in new and different ways. Is that close to your question?
Yeah. No, that's great. That's really helpful. I guess as somebody who hasn't experienced it, as Mark acknowledged at the beginning, it's really helpful to sort of envisage what it was like for you as a young person.
And I believe now, especially here, Brad, and other places, you've got the foretaste of it. You've had moments when felt it, and then felt it backed away.
Yeah.
And don't be discouraged by that. I think that's just him saying, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think? Is this it? Yes, Lord. And then I fell back, and you get so disappointed in yourself. No, just keep leaning in.
Yeah.
And don't be surprised if it happens in incredibly surprising ways. Because I wasn't looking for it.
Yeah.
But he built on it and, lit the fire.
What effect did you see that flowing then? So almost you're saying, you've got your Baptist church you're going to on Sunday. This is happening on Thursday. And I'm guessing people are coming from different churches to that.
All over. Yep.
What flow-on effect did you see of that?
So the effect like on the church or the following effect?
So the church would just sort of run along doing its usual thing. What was the interplay?
Yep. I saw the church hanging on for dear life, not wanting to change. And then finally having to change. It's like it started to overcome the church. So then all of a sudden it was okay to, not do the 3 hymns, this and the doxology. Not against liturgy. I like liturgy, but the whole thing just kind of overcame what it was. And it's really where then I picked up after then, the special gift God gave me in coming to Australia was to get out of the American culture. I know if you're American, please don't be offended, but the rest of the world knows what I'm talking about. Get out of the American culture, come see it in a different culture, and then realize that personal renewal really is the key to corporate change. If you want to change the church and try to do it without that sense of renewal, you get a fight. Well documented. If you want to see it happen, let's start with renewal and rekindling that heart. And we'll still have the same problems, but we'll see them in a new way. And believe that something could happen in a new way where all the strategic plans and everything, which I followed then into, I'm going to help the church now. I'm going to help it move forward. And we did some incremental help, but we never saw the renewal that we saw in those early days. So once it happens, it's almost like people begin to get to the point where they finally gets to the point they can't deny it.
Yes.
So it all of a sudden then starts to bring about change. But I find people so quickly move back into form.
Yes.
And move away from fire. They move back into form.
Yes. So you then went on to study, and one of the people you studied was Richard Lovelace, who, for those of you who don't know, in many ways, a lot of Tim Keller's work around revival and renewal, he acknowledges, Lovelace. So you may have been exposed to some Lovelace without realizing you have been, if you've been a follower of Tim Keller. And he really talks about the dynamics of renewal. So experiencing that renewal and then moving into, I guess, that study, but what did you learn?
Well, I really learned that my instincts actually had documentation to it, that it was the character, it was the internal, it was that sense of reality that that's what's going to fuel the whole thing. And that's what continues to fuel the whole thing. And I learned, down through history, how a lot of movements start with fire and then, finish with form, and the form tries to kind of capture it, organize it, distribute it, put different things on it, and that's when you can just see it kind of go down. But that spontaneous happens as people take responsibility for their own journey with God and the depth of that journey coming from new character formation in their life. So being and doing are 2 tracks that I teach on, but there's an order in it. Just like I think I picked it up from him, Mark chapter 3. Jesus said, "Come be with me, then go minister for me." And then here's one of the final lessons Lovelace taught me. And then you'll have the authority to drive out the demons. So it's not just being or doing, it's both, but it has an order.
Yes.
You don't wait to go out, but as you are with him, you're going out. And now you see an authority that's different than natural abilities. So I would characterize, forgive me, I've sinned, I'm a boomer, but I would characterize during our whole time, we turn this thing into natural abilities and away from spiritual formation and spiritual authority. So that's why the church is institutionalized. But if I'm taking responsibility for my own journey, what begins to happen is that creates a presence and authority in my life that actually can change some things that typically don't change.
I wonder, just on that, you've sort of started to explore it, but talking about the renewal that sort of happened when you were a teenager, and then how the church has sort of adopted a lot of these things as a form, what would you say are a number of the sort of typical things that the Western church has, just set out, and that's what we're doing now, and that's why we're kind of resistant to a new renewal? Like, what needs to be renewed?
I'll just give you one that you can put a whole of. What I have seen the church do in my lifetime is create silos. So we'll have the evangelism silo. We'll have the discipleship silo. We'll have the small group silo. We'll have the worship team silo. And that compartmentalization of the church has, I think, this is just my opinion, destroyed the fire, put out the fire. And when you tear down the silos, people panic because now you've taken away a structure that they put their confidence in.
Yes.
And so then they fight harder for the preservation. Jesus wants us to do this and this. It's not that he doesn't want those things, but he wants it integrated into a life. So the way I'm saying it now is we got to get back to one simple thing, apprenticing the life of Jesus, not just the core beliefs of Jesus. The life of Jesus, starting to live like him. And, that includes me. And living my life embedded in my world and actually trying to figure out, Jesus, how in the world did you behave like that? Because I don't want to behave like that. But that builds my dependency. That takes me deeper into trust. And the second major thing I would say, probably the major silo is when we separated discipleship and mission. Wow. When you separate discipleship and mission, that all of a sudden says, I'll be trained over here, and I'm then supposed to love the people over here. But when I know people say, it's very simple. But if you go back to Christ, he loved the people there, and that's where the disciples learned how to be a disciple in the midst of doing mission.
Yes, 100%.
So if the church actually keeps saying, come in here, get trained, go out there, I think it's going to continue to institutionalize. But when the church has no walls and it goes out there, and mission and discipleship are one, I think that catalytic force is what ignites the fire. Because when a fire is, you need that spark, and boom, when that spark happens, then it's caught. And we're not firing or exhibiting that renewal because I think we've separated this thing off so much. So churches say to me, well, what do we do? And I say, guess what? First, we're not going back. Second, we are really not going to go back. And third, we have one marching order. Go be like him. Love him and your neighbor. Let's see what happens.
It's fascinating. I'm just thinking, I guess I'm thinking out loud and formulating questions as I speak here, because it's so interesting. There's a hunger at the moment. There's the Jesus Revolution movie. There's almost you're sensing what you guys experience. There's a lot of young leaders we're looking for that. Part of what they're looking for is also coming from a discontent, a holy discontent with what they felt is the contemporary church's inability to do discipleship, but what's really interesting is in many ways you could argue the contemporary church form is the formalization of what happened at the very beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the contemporary worship song, which is trying to capture, if you did a sort of historical thing, you go back and go, the contemporary church really is born in those meetings that you talk about
totally.
in California. Even the sound, the sort of, easy rock sound or whatever you want to, so it's a fascinating historical moment where we feel that holy discontent. We long for something like that, but also that's also the origins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's really weird. So I guess what, having seen that cycle.
Can I just
go for it. Go for it.
I think you hit it right there, because that's why people don't want to break free, because it has the origins of their faith there, but their faith is locked into the fact now that this thing is everywhere, not integrated into a life. I mean, he really didn't come to start a worship service. He really came with that kind of mandate. But we saw in those early days, oh, wow, should have great music. So now we have a great music department. Oh, wow. Prayer is important. Yeah. So we'll have a prayer team.
Yes,
oh, wow.
Yes.
We ought to probably train some people. So let's do discipleship. That's what we saw going on. It was organic back then. It was out of control. It was trusting God's Spirit. Didn't mean to.
Oh, no. I'm thinking out loud. Like, I mean, in one way you could argue that this is what Western culture does. I don't know, you think of punk or something and it's crazy in the early days. And then, you've got someone playing at the Rod Laver Arena in town, some punk thing, and everyone's paying there thinking it's all very orderly, So there's that dynamic of it. But I think what would be the advice, all across the place, we're hearing what we did last night. We gathered, we're pressing in, we're heading into unknown territory. We had our services disrupted a few weeks ago where the run sheet went out the window and communion turned into an altar call and had the Spirit moving amongst us. So there's an element of how do we not try and run the program of this?
Yeah.
And how do we press into it? So what advice would you give looking back, having been on that journey? Because I think also you probably think of as well friends who were there and have not finished well. What advice would you give to someone who's like 25, 30, they're at the end of themselves, contemporary church, they're seeing the problems, but want to press into this? What would be your advice?
Yeah. Well, good, Mark. I want to just turn it back to you. What would be, no. I think it was what I experienced last night. We're just going to come and seek him. I do think it needs to return back to simple. We crave his presence. We need to just tell him that. We crave your work. We're tired of our work. As I coach leaders all over the world, there's a massive problem with burnout.
Yes.
Massive. And that burnout is coming, one of the keys to burnout is ministering out of duty and responsibility.
Yeah.
Out of formation instead of formation and passion. And sometimes we all got to do duty and responsibility, but how about we start letting the duty and responsibility rest over here and we just get together and we just crave wanting to be with him. I mean, because in some sense, that's what then the first Bible studies or whatever was. It was just like, we were so excited because maybe we had a chance to experience his presence again. I mean, it was like Jesus was walking in the room. And when that begins to happen, I just want to worship and call out to him and feel the presence of others doing the same. Small, big, whatever. Kindling fires that start happening. That I was discouraged. Honestly, if that hadn't happened, I probably would have, gone on with a career and maybe thrown some money back at the church saying, yeah, I remember that. I better do that. But now it's my life. And if we've got to turn it back to that simple, beautiful. We need you. You know, I think of the story with Moses and all that he had gone through. And in Exodus 33, God says, okay, I'm going to go over here, but you guys go on over there. Do you believe Moses told God no? No. That's not how it's going to work, God. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
That's not how it's going to work. Here's how it's going to work. We're not going anywhere if you're not over there. We're staying right here. I think we just got to say, we're not going to settle for anything else but your presence. You know, all great Christians walk with a limp sometimes. And sometimes it's that bringing our brokenness and who we are, and we blew it. I'm impressed with Nehemiah. Nehemiah didn't do a lot of the things, but his forefathers were part of it. And I know you're mad sometimes at the boomers. I would be too, because of what, in some sense, we made it. But you got to inherit the problem before you can change the problem. And so, God, we surrender. We give the church back to you. Come. Come. And here's what's going to happen. Our experience was it didn't happen right away. And then as we kept leaning in, man, it started happening. And we had this, it was so funny. We had this coffee house where we put fake tables up and fake candles on the tables and all this stuff like that, you know, called the thing the bridge and put a fishnet up and stuff like that. And it was like, it was so great. It wasn't the fishnet and the tables. It was that he came. It was that he came. I know that's probably not maybe the formula, but to me, that's how it happened. Until when we get to the end of ourselves, we're at the beginning of hope. But till we get there, we are going to inadvertently try every idea we have about how God should do this, as opposed to telling him, we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Come, Jesus.
Yeah.
Come.
It's almost, I'm just reflecting as you're, just on what you're saying, like, by the way, there's a great line I want to come back to. Often you throw out these great lines and you've got to come back to the top. Before I ask my question, you said something like, when we come to the beginning of hope. Say that line. What did you say?
Come to the end of ourselves, we're at the beginning of hope. Yeah. Hope comes. And by the way, hope and courage are tied, I found. When you don't have hope, you don't have courage. But when you have new hope, you have new courage to lean back in. And that whole process of coming to the end of yourself is an incredibly hard, painful process. And that's, I think, what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, Eugene Peterson could do it, so I'll use my own language. I think God just said, the gig's up.
Yeah,
it's finally up. I'm not going to keep blessing and giving my presence to the people that don't do what I really intended to do. I'll shut it down. I mean, my whole life I was told to go to church. Then there was a year in my life I was told, don't go to church.
Wow.
And we did that globally. I mean, I don't think everybody's, look. I don't think we realized it's the world stopped.
Yeah, true. Yeah, COVID. Yeah.
It stopped.
Yeah.
In our lifetime. And I think for us who love Jesus, it stopped for a reason. It's over. Now come, chase me. In the beginning of our lives, he chases us. But you know what renewal is? Us chasing him.
Yeah, wow.
Boom.
I mean, it's interesting too, because like there's a singularity in what you're talking about. Like it dawned on me the other day, like I think when we talk about burnout, we can have this preconceived notion of the super busy alpha type leader pastor who's working a gazillion hours a week and going everything and they're just driving. But I'm encountering more people who aren't doing that. Like I know people who are working 3 days a week and they're burnt out.
Yeah.
And I think it's more than work hours. It's now it's almost like a mental captivity of constantly comparing, of trying to do everything. Like I'm also meeting people who are like, gone to this point, they're like, I've done the I went to a big contemporary church, Pentecostal church. I then got into the New Reformed thing, and then I got into to this, and I did that, and I've just come to the end of it, and I'm just like, here I am. Like, it's almost we've been spinning the different like barrels in a revolver and trying to get a shot off, and barrels in a revolver.
Ooh.
We're not
Let's
a gun
go
culture.
plates. Let's go plates.
Spinning plates.
Spinning plates.
And,
Better than revolver.
But I think in what you're saying is I wonder whether there's a huge exhaustion. Yes, working too much, 100%, and there's a hunger for Sabbath and hunger for all that. But then there's this other thing of, which is just, this is resonating as you're saying this, with it's choosing one thing. Because I think people are driving themselves insane of like always comparing, looking. Social media is great for us seeing something happening in Asbury, but it's bad in that we're constantly comparing. And I wonder if it's the singular choice. Like, I choose not all these things, I choose you. And I wonder if perhaps even for our audience, it's the burnout. That's the bigger burnout.
Yeah.
Constantly thinking through things. And what I hear you're saying is there's a simplicity, a singularity.
Yes.
Like just coming before him. And the other thing that really hit me by Asbury, it's not, like, I don't know, if it was the Asbury revival and people were spinning plates and all of a sudden it's now the amazing, they have supernatural ability to spin plates in the air, this whiz-bang thing, but it's not. It's quieter, it's devoted. And Pete Greig said it's almost like an older sort of devoted, it's something old-fashioned in a way. And I wonder if that's about the simplicity. It's not going to be a gigantic power display. It is the power of God, but coming. And Alan Emerson, Trudy reminded me, Alan Emerson, our friend, he said, he prophesied that there would be, the next revival would be this revival of the still small voice.
Wow.
And Trudy reminded me that the other day, my wife Trudy, and I just was like, oh, well, I think there's something in that.
I need to affirm that real quick, because I think John 10, my sheep hear my voice and follow. I totally would affirm that, because I think the next is about voice recognition. The ability to recognize his voice and distinguish it from all the other culture, and then have the courage, hope, wow, I'm hearing his voice, to now courageously step into the shedding of things as Jesus takes his sheep to the new place. And, one other quick thing, the simplicity of it. Asbury lit up during the same time as Jesus movement too.
Yes.
That was the former time with Asbury. So I think we're afraid, are we part of the worldwide movement? No. Right here, right now, with us. We're done. We're going to let it go, and we're just going to go after him. That's what I so appreciated about our time last night. We're going. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's go together. Let's see what he has.
Yeah. After reflecting a little bit last night, it's kind of like we need to have expectation without our own expectations. Does that make sense?
Come expectant.
Yes.
But not driven by our expectation.
Exactly. Yeah.
You use that one.
Yeah.
Right? That's good. That's now your Liddy line. Now.
Yeah, great.
Come expectant without expectation.
You're zingily.
Yes, you. Come on.
That's good.
That is really good.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really encouraging conversation. Thank you all for joining us for today's episode. Thank you so much, Terry. We look forward to chatting with you again for another episode.
Yep.
See you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time.